Greetings, friends, and welcome to our Saturday episode of Countdown to His Coming, where we're going to examine two wars. The two wars we're going to look at are, first of all, a cultural war against the Christian family. And to make an emphasis of this, we're going to recognize an anniversary. The anniversary of True Love waits. Then the second war we're going to look at is that one biblically prophesied for the end times. It's taking place in Israel right now. No, it's not one we're waiting for. It's one that's been going on ever since October 7th, 2023. And as we look how it's expanding even this week, it brings us some very scary possibilities of what could be going on in the future in the Middle East. Well, first, let's talk about that very special anniversary. It was July the 29th, 1994. When Southern Baptist youth groups from all over the country arrived in Washington, D.C. to stake out their True Love Waits commitment cards right there on the mall at our nation's capital. Among those present was a youth group from the Perimeter Road Baptist Church in Valdosta, Georgia, led by our youth minister at the time, Stu Dammer, and his wife, Christy, as they took an awful lot of our young people, including our daughters, Joy and Libby, to be a part of that great event. Christian worship was going on all over the place, and the picture of these hundreds of thousands gathered to make their statement about Christian purity right there at our nation's capital had a tremendous impact, an impact that we can see even 30 years later. Now, that movement went on in our churches for a generation, but it's kind of fizzled out as far as by title, a True Love Waits movement, yet the teaching, of course, remains, and I hope it's strong in your church. I hope we're continuing to teach a Christian view of the sanctity of marriage and the purpose for the Christian family. And it drives some people crazy. I noticed this week of those who recognize the True Love Waits anniversary. One was a strange bedfellow, and that's NPR. Of course, NPR, from a far leftist viewpoint, one of the worst ever, congratulations, supported by your taxpayer dollars, lamented the fact that True Love Waits, almost as if, wow, this thing that popped up in the 90s, no, this is the way Christians have taught sexuality since the beginning. That this thing that had popped up in the 90s still continues to influence sex education around the country. And yes, it does, especially in states where we have the heaviest Christian population, where there are people who are believers in forms of government at local and state levels who are able to, once again, make our education systems reasonable. That when they teach sexuality, that abstinence is the number one choice on the list. That you look at what this means for your future life and your future families and recognize that God's way is actually the best way. Well, NPR was lamenting in its article the fact that, oh, these folks, these Christians have been able to negatively impact our sex education training that we should have in schools, where they would rather be able to sexualize your children at a very young age, teach them every way to have every kind of sex imaginable, and to experiment with all kinds of things, because they've got to decide, I mean, even in grade school, whether they are homosexual or bisexual or heterosexual or a combination of both, or they're just going to try anything and everything and experiment and see what it's like. And this kind of sexual license, far past even the sexual revolution that started occurring in the 60s and 70s, is now what's standard in the curricula of many public schools around our nation. And we're reaping the whirlwind because of that. Is some of these folks who are raised in that kind of generation, by the time they get into college, have just decided they're going to throw away all of those norms, and we have damaged human beings walking around full of scars because they've been taught a lie straight from Satan's heart, if Satan has a heart. But it's a heart of evil, a heart of wickedness that has one objective in mind: destroy the Christian family structure altogether. It's no secret. It's laid out even in the Marxist descriptions of what they want in our nation. Their attacks on the family are no secrets. Instead, children should be recognized as possessions of the state, even getting to the point where if you as a family teach these Christian principles to your children, you might be considered a child abuser. How dare you say that the sexual identity your child came home with after being indoctrinated at school is somehow wrong? You've got to recognize that and support it. And if you don't, well, you're the real enemy of society. Well, getting back to a Baptist perspective on this, there's a great article in Baptist Press this week talking about that anniversary of True Love Waits, something that, by the way, goes way past those anniversaries. I'll just use this as a testimony before I read from that article. Sue and I were raised in Baptist churches in a Christian culture, and in the 70s we were dating and preparing to be married, as we were in 1976. Boy, that seems like a long time ago. But even then, we were raised with the understanding of saving ourselves for marriage, which we did. I've had only one sexual partner in my life, and that's been my wife. She would tell you the same thing. We passed that along to our children, and our daughters had the benefit of these programs that we were teaching in our youth groups in the 80s and 90s, and they were a part of the True Love Waits movement. Yes, they signed their card. They made their commitment to holiness in their life before the Lord. And guess what? They found young men who had made a similar commitment in their lives. They got married, and now we're looking at yet another generation being raised. And wow, now we've got a granddaughter in college, a grandson about to join the Air Force, a set of teenagers in high school. I mean, my goodness, the next generation is coming fast. And they, whereas perhaps not in the form of that exact program that we taught in the 90s, they are being taught also about the Christian principles of marriage, sexuality, and family. Sure, it goes against the grain of what is being promoted all over the place these days, but folks, listen, Christians have always gone against the grain of the culture. We shouldn't think of it as an anomaly. It's just natural for believers because we have a different standard, a higher standard, one that comes with following Jesus Christ. And it's one we need to continue to promote. In the Baptist Press article on this, blogger and author Erin Davis, who's spent the last 15 years ministering to young women, said she's watched the talk of abstinence subside. Yeah, the stadiums are no longer full of teenagers promising to wait. And as I've watched the pendulum swing, I've had, simultaneous urges to cheer and to sound the alarm. As she wrote in her blog, leaders today should be, quote, they should broaden the conversation about sex, marriage, and intimacy beyond the finish line message that teens sometimes heard when we asked them to wait. Now, Davis is a pastor's wife in Missouri, and she wrote that, quote, as the church rides this next wave of the sexual revolution, we must teach our young people a sexual theology that goes beyond just a few thou shalt nots. But at the end of the day, abstinence still matters, and purity and chastity still need to be taught. Davis, in the blog post titled, Why We Still Need True Love Waits, described the devastating effect that casual sex has had on college-aged women. She noted that the top 2 prescribed drugs at one state university's health center were antidepressants and birth control pills. And she quoted an author who said, this is a world which welcomes every sort of sexual behavior except chastity. Now, these are our future wives and mothers, future Sunday school teachers and pastors' wives. They will sit in our pews and in our women's Bible studies, and the men who make up the other half of this sexual equation will also come into our churches as the walking wounded. Now, despite a culture so far off course, she wrote that we must warn the next wave. We still need to beat the drum of purity. We still need to teach young people to wait. And words like purity, chastity, and virginity should still be in the church's vernacular. In this department, perhaps it's time to teach like it's 1999, because true love still waits. Now, some of you remember from those days Richard Ross, who was co-founder of True Love Waits movement. He told Baptist Press that the phrase raises a pivotal question. Wait for what? He says that one answer stands supreme above all others. True love, meaning a life of purity, waits until one approaches the throne at the end of life on earth. He said there's a Christ follower that presents a gleaming gift to His Highness, a gift of a lifetime of sexual purity in mind and body. Some will present a gift of lifetime purity before and during marriage. Widows will present a gift of purity before, during, and after marriage. Says Ross, a student ministry professor at Southwestern Seminary. And he said, lifetime singles can even present a pristine gift of purity in all the seasons of their lives. You see, everyone before the throne will have faced temptation. Everyone will have stumbled in some ways and be covered by grace. And everyone will believe that only the King, that's with the capital K, King Jesus, is truly worthy of their gift of purity. Well, I could go on talking about this, but you get the idea. It's a beautiful anniversary we've just celebrated this week, 30 years since the great stakeout. I'm so glad my daughter's got to be a part of that. But you know, there's a new generation coming up that needs to be taught, maybe not necessarily by an event that's culminating the teaching that's going on in our churches, but the events that take place in their own families. As you sit down with your children, maybe present them with that piece of jewelry that they can cherish, and focus toward why we exist in the first place. There is something about humanity that just doesn't continue unless we reproduce the next generation, hopefully the next good and godly generation. And today we're running into people who, matter of fact, I read about some of the ladies that talked about they made a True Love Waits commitment, then couldn't find a decent guy to get married to. I'm hearing a lot of guys today saying the same thing. Look, we made a True Love Waits commitment, and it's hard to find a good girl that seems to have the same kind of, shall we say, Christian virtues that I'm looking for in a wife. Perhaps we need to re-examine and create some kind of Christian dating apps for just the people that understand our culture and what we're looking for. Because if you go out on those in the world, you're going to run into every kind of imaginable sin and sin background of people who are trying to get involved with you, not because they want a Christian marriage or a Christian home, but so they can just take advantage of you for a season. So friends, these are all things we need to think about in the new generation of True Love Waits, as it's all about the lifestyle of holiness before our God. Let's move on to another war that's taking place right now, and that's the war that's happening in Israel, one that is biblically predicted. And as we look at the players that continue to stomp on this stage, you can't help but notice that they all, for the first time in history, are those nations described in Ezekiel's prophecy, chapter 38 and 39, about a war that's taking place in the latter days, exactly Ezekiel's words from that passage. That involves one nation in particular at the head of the list. The nation was Persia. That's today's Iran. Same country, same place, same spot on the map it's always had. But since 1979, that has been the state of Islamic revolution with one purpose in mind, which is why they have a Quds force. That's referencing Jerusalem. The Jerusalem force that one day will fly its flags over the conquered capital of Jerusalem. It drives them crazy that Israel today is in control of that little bitty strip of land about the size of New Jersey, because they should not exist at all. There is no compromise with Iran wanting to peacefully exist with Israel. Over and over and over again, they've made it clear that they want to see the elimination of the state of Israel. To that end, they've been building their military, building their weapons capabilities so that they can have nuclear weapons, because they feel like that's the easiest way that they'll one day be able to eliminate Israel. And strangely enough, our nation has been complicit during the Biden administration of sending money back to Iran, releasing sanctions, even taking some groups off terror watch lists, and just setting up this whole scenario. And we have a presidential candidate right now that has stood with not Israel, strongly with Israel, but instead stood to say, oh, listen, Israel, you need to stand down. You need to just stop fighting these terrorists. It's too much of a humanitarian price to pay for you to go into Gaza and eliminate Hamas. No mention of the fact that since October 7th last year, we have had American hostages as well as other Israeli hostages being held in Gaza. Still, many of those held today. Some may just be the bodies of those that have already died. And Hamas could have ended this war any day of the week by just saying, we surrender and here are your hostages back. And it would all be over. Yet they can't do that because, of course, they are one of Iran's proxies, the three H's: Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. All hate Israel. All in their charters say that they are formed for one reason only: to destroy Jews and the Jewish state, and to once again see the Middle East as a 100% Islamic ruled region. That's the purpose and the plan. And to that end, terrorist organizations have no problem attacking Israelis and attacking Jews. And there's hardly been a week go by since October 7th that rockets aren't fired into the nation of Israel, that Israelis have not laid down their life and been casualties of this war. People by the thousands right now can't live in their homes in northern Israel because of the rocket barrages. We even saw this dastardly attack on a soccer field where Druze children and youth were killed by rockets coming from Hezbollah. And yet this week we had the strangest of all things happening, what should be celebrated, when some of these terror leaders were taken out. One taken out in Tehran. Well, instead of saying, oh great, one less terrorist that needs to be eliminated because they have stood in solidarity with these people trying to destroy the nation of Israel. Instead, oh, Iran has thrown up their arms and said, oh, this is dastardly, this is terrible, and we are going to retaliate. We're going to attack Israel. All week long, people have been trying to get out of Israel, people flying out, airspace closed. It seems like that attack that they had back in April was just a dress rehearsal for something bigger. It's perhaps that they are at the point where they've accumulated enough information because of the failed attack, where 95% of all the rockets and drones they sent to attack Israel were destroyed. But they've learned some things, and perhaps now they know a way to open up a multi-front war that not even Israel with its Iron Dome could somehow stop. We'll see. Who knows what's going to happen in the coming days? But we do know this has happened, with one of the strangest members of NATO being the nation of Turkey. This week, Turkey did something just outlandish. Now, if you remember, Turkey, once a very westernized nation, as a part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, with one of the largest armies in NATO. Turkey sits there in between two cultures. And since President Erdogan took over, and by the way, has met with Khamenei in Iran, met with Putin in Russia, has been seen shaking hands with them and coordinating things with them, that all of a sudden Turkey is a strange bedfellow in NATO. because Erdogan has now been, especially over the last year, publicly calling for nations that are Islamic in their background to be faithful to Allah and take out the nation of Israel. It's time. This week, when those terrorists were killed, it was Turkey that sparked outrage just yesterday after President Erdogan ordered a day of mourning for the death of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh. And as flags around the world at Turkish embassies were lowered to half-staff, he especially included the one in Tel Aviv, Israel. What a mockery. The Israeli foreign minister, of course, summoned the deputy Turkish ambassador and gave a severe reprimand, because what are you doing trying to, right here on Israeli soil, honor a terrorist that called for the killing of Israelis? There, when the Tel Aviv embassy flag was lowered in honor of Haniyeh's death, the state of Israel has said, no, this makes no sense at all. And we are not going to stop defending ourselves just because you are throwing a fit. Well, what's interesting is after the Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz said this in the statement, we will not tolerate expressions of mourning for a murderer like Haniyeh. Turkey shoots right back. Katz went on to accuse Erdogan of turning Turkey into a dictatorship over its support for Hamas murderers and rapists against the stance of the entire free world. But the Turkish foreign minister responded to Katz's comment saying you cannot achieve peace by killing negotiators, threatening diplomats, in apparent reference to Haniyeh, who was reportedly involved in ongoing ceasefire talks. Isn't it amazing? There have been ongoing ceasefire talks since the first day that Hamas invaded Israel and took hostages. There is only one response. It would be the same response that we had in World War II as Allied forces invaded Mussolini's Italy and Hitler's Germany, and as we from the United States invaded Japan. There must be unconditional surrender. That's how you win a war. That's how you change the cultural picture. Well, that's not happening at all in the Middle East. Instead, we're watching this war of biblical proportions ramp up a little more every single day. Now, supposedly, this movement from the Turkish leaders went all the way to Washington, D.C., but not surprising, because some of that wonderful money that we allowed Iran to have keeps coming back to American shores in the form of support for all these protesters. They're really just terrorists, and those they can somehow manage to recruit from our own students, running around some of our major cities waving Palestinian flags by the thousands, Hamas flags, putting graffiti on and desecrating monuments in some of our major cities. And we're supposed to think that these are just peaceful protests. Or are they just one more step in what's going to soon become not a localized war for the Middle East, but a war that's going to involve the entire world as we set the stage for the last end-time battles before Jesus comes. Friends, these are the things that's happening all around us this week. Watch it, check it out, see what they're doing. Don't be left in ignorance. But don't expect that if you just drop in on one of the news programs of one of the major news networks, the legacy media, that you'll find out anything. You won't. I decided last night I wanted to see how CBS, for example, was covering these important issues of our time. So I dropped in on the 6:30 CBS News last night. To my dismay, we watched mostly commercials, many of them about whatever the new drug is being produced by Big Pharma, and saw very little actual news. A few minutes covering the possible tropical storm that's coming, just less than a minute's worth of coverage over what's going on in Israel, and then a bunch of feel-good, wonderful personal stories about other things going on around our country. I was amazed that I sat there for 30 minutes and probably had about 3 minutes worth of news the whole time. And it was just not laid out, didn't give the facts, just really touching things up to continue to brainwash our people into thinking about what a wonderful, good socialist utopia we're going to have in the future if you'll just line up behind all our favorite candidates. Friends, we are living in the last days. There's no doubt about that. But you as a believer need to keep in mind what Jesus said. He said, watch. You're watching so that you'll know what's going on. You can explain it to family and friends, but so that you can trust when things start going really haywire that Jesus is in control, because as he said, I've told you everything ahead of time. And yes, not only has he done that, but he's also said you and I have one particular Great Commission left, and the Great Commission continues until he returns, and that is share this gospel with the world, make disciples of all nations until I come. That's our job. That's exactly our, not just our commission, but it's our heartbeat until our Lord and Savior returns to straighten out the mess that people have made of his world. Listen, you have a great day in the Lord. Worship somewhere with God's people tomorrow on the Lord's Day. If you're anywhere near Hendersonville, North Carolina, I'll be preaching at the Mud Creek Baptist Church at the 10:30 service. Would love to see you there. God bless you. You have a great day in the Lord. We'll see you next Saturday as we have another countdown to his coming.